she heard my mother say, in a brash voice, "You're a witch, you're a witch." And my mother said that she needed to kill her because she was a witch.
Whisper in the dark place, eyes that pierce the shadow, voice that chills your cold veins. Nowhere left to hide, no, no. Running through the silence, echoes in your mind's maze, trapped in endless twilight, can't escape the mind gaze.
What up, home slices, home fries, and homes of other varieties? If you're new, welcome. I'm Emily the Fine Art Medium. I'm a psychic medium who specializes in the paranormal, and I have a degree in social deviance. And if you've been here before, welcome back. Today's video is going to be a reaction video. I know you guys have missed those. But in today's reaction, we're going to be reacting to Almost False, which is a YouTube channel / podcast channel. I know they do podcasting stuff, kind of like how we do at Lights at Midnight. And so in this video, he interviews Michael Anthony Gagliardi, who shares his childhood account of when his mother was possessed by demonic entities. And I wanted to go through this case because A, it caught my attention because duh, and B, like, this is a field that I do specialize in and I have a lot of experience in. So I wanted to get to the bottom of it and see what the heck is going on. Also, I'll be reacting to about 7 clips, 15 minutes in total. Of course, please watch the original video for full context. It's over an hour long, so obviously give the creator their credit, give them the views that they deserve. And yeah, this case is very intense, very traumatic for Michael. And yeah, I want to see what the heck. I want to see what type of entities. A lot of entities that are negative can come across as demonic, but they're not always demonic. But yeah, there's a lot here to assess. I want to see what the heck because this is intense. This is very severe, and it's not something I even wish on my enemies. So, let's crack into this video.
And my mother's sister, so my aunt, she was a very spiritual person into the occult, and my mother and my sister, I think, attempted to conjure their father's spirit because they missed him so badly. Well, as that's forbidden, in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Why? Because it works. And whether that was his spirit or not, or a demonic interpretation pretending to be, which is, what it really is. That's what got started the oppression. And from my sister's recollection of everything that she told me, that happened right about just before I was born, and then began to increase as I got older. And like I said, there was no nurturing. She never kissed me. She never held me. Even the episode of getting soup poured on me. I remember going in the taxi. She never held me. She never touched me. We went to the doctor. Doctor looked at me. I remember the waiting room, sitting in the waiting room, in agony and pain and, whimpering away. And she never held me. She never said any encouraging words, never touched me, anything. And on the way back home. So at that moment, that really heightened my awareness of my mother as someone who is not to be trusted.
So, of course, this is a sad situation. So, the mother and her sister, and from the terms in which Michael uses, because it kind of gets a little confusing, it sounds like his mother and his aunt, and then somehow his sister was brought into this or was around when this occurred, but the father of the mother, aka Michael's grandfather, had passed away, and of course it left some of the family members extremely heartbroken and desperate to see him again. And they did what many people have tried to do in the past, which is bring their family member back to life. And it never bodes well when you do that kind of thing. And even when you're trying to just communicate and not necessarily bring the person back from the dead, but it usually doesn't bode well because of the negative vibration that is put into those actions. First of all, you can't just bring someone back from the dead after they've passed. That is just the natural order of things. It sucks, I know, but that's just how it is. You can't do it. Once they've passed, their consciousness and soul then transforms into a different type of energy. And that's how, energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It just transforms, changes, turns into something new or different. And so you can't make the body become more alive, but the soul and the consciousness, they're still around but in a different form. But in this case, that person, when they passed, did cross over. So they weren't going to get anything in communication that was positive anyway. And it sucks. It's sad. But the sadness, the desperation one feels when trying to do those types of actions, it attracts the same or similar things in the same vibration. And while feeling sad and desperate after a loved one has passed, those are normal feelings to feel as humans. That's what it means to be humans. But you have to understand that when you are doing specific types of actions, especially within the magic or the occult areas, that's where it really matters. Because if you're doing something that can bring forth another energy, it can be very dicey, and you, like I said, will most likely bring in something negative that matches that vibration that was put into that action. And so the thing that they conjured was not positive, obviously, as you can tell by the story and how things progressed. But they did not bring forth the grandfather, Michael's grandfather, or his mother's father. But guys, if you are in the situation where you've lost a loved one and you are still grieving and you're in that desperate mindset of trying to talk to them again, please understand that there are safe ways that you can communicate with your deceased loved one. It's difficult, especially if you're not somebody that is energetically sensitive to where you can hear clairaudiently or receive messages claircognizantly or clairvoyantly, but it is possible to communicate to loved ones. You just, again, might not hear or feel or see a response back, but they will feel it on their end. And I'll maybe make a longer video just addressing this situation, but communication through your thoughts and prayers, due to the energetic link that has been formed when they were alive, due to the love you shared, that makes it possible for you to communicate with one another. It may be difficult to hear the response, especially if you aren't energy or energetically sensitive, but it's still possible through dreams, meditation, and symbolic messages like angel numbers and signs. Meditation, learning to meditate properly, is not only a great way to communicate, but it's also good for your mental health and stress, anxiety, etc. But it can open you up to being better at receiving messages or just more aware of your surroundings. And you can go on YouTube or Google like different types of meditations. It doesn't matter what kind of meditation, as long as you learn how to meditate properly. And as long as you keep trying it and practicing, you'll get better at it. Now, just full disclosure, doesn't mean that you'll become a full-blown medium, but it might make you more aware or more receptive at noticing certain messages or symbols. So just let me make that clear. You can try automatic writing, so writing down things without thinking. And then, of course, your dreams. They can communicate to you through your dreams. That's why I always say, keep a dream journal. Because a lot of times people will forget their dreams. But if you write it down ASAP as soon as you wake up, the chance that you'll remember those dreams will be better. And the more you do that, the better you'll be at remembering longer. But yeah, keep those things in mind. But yeah, you can do that. And yeah, it sucks because it's not like you're going to be able to have a conversation like you would have when they're alive. But I feel like it's better than nothing. But also it is safer than using a Ouija board. I don't care what anybody else says. And anyone who says Ouija boards are good, like generally good, are very misguided. And opens up people to dangers that they don't need to be facing. So I would say your safest bet are the things I just recommended. And obviously you can use other divination practices, but I would say these would be the safest things to do. Some people use pendulums. When you're feeling that grief and desperation, I would not advise using pendulums because, again, you're doing an activity under a certain vibration that could attract things to you more than likely. But yeah. But that doesn't mean you don't need to know discernment either when doing like automatic writing and things. I'm just saying, generally speaking, those things are much more safe.
We're isolated in this tiny town and we're way up north. And as the years progress, my mother is beginning to get worse. She's very aloof. She begins talking to herself. That was the really first thing. The first thing she started saying was that she began complaining to us that she was hearing voices. That was the number one thing. She was hearing voices. There was scratching in the walls, thumping, knocking, certain things like that. She said that she was seeing little people, which is an interesting thing in Canada, but that seemed to progress. And she began to lose more and more of herself. And by the time I was 6 and 7 and 8 years old, she was pretty much in another world. She was talking to herself all the time, basically unaware that my sister and I were even there. My dad was off working 5 days a week, 6 days a week, back down in Toronto, where we just moved away from. So he would go down there to Toronto, work there, and it would just be us three in the house. So this began to get worse. And probably by the time I was, 9 or 10 years old, it went up a notch. Around 9 years old, 10 years old, where things started to escalate, get really bad. I never saw my sister, even though I grew up with her. She lived in her room down the hallway with a padlock on the inside of her door, and barely ever saw her. And by 9 or 10 years old, my mom was progressively worse, screaming in the middle of the night, sitting in a chair and whacking herself with a log until she was bloody, and laughing and speaking in all kinds of different voices. And I would sit in the room with her watching TV, and she'd be talking to herself in strange voices and having conversations, and I never could pick up anything. That I realized, 20 years later, that she was speaking in different languages because I couldn't understand a word she said, and I wasn't privy to that as a child, but every night as soon as the sun would go down, that's when things started to really escalate and get bad. And either I would go for a bike ride or something and try and get out of the house as much as I could. Sometimes I even spent the night in the park, because I didn't want to go home. So I was so terrified. But I would go home. I'd go to my room, my dresser where I kept my clothes. I filled all the drawers with bricks. So I had like some, I don't know, 20 bricks or so. And I would push the cabinet up against the armoire. It was kind of like push it up against the door. And then I slept in the same position, in the fetal position with a hockey stick, and I waited because every night, sometime around 2, 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the morning, my mother would come and then rattle the door and try and get in. And when she couldn't, she'd go screaming down the hall. And I remember one night in particular, I was curious and I looked. She rattled the door. Once she did that, I knew that when she found she couldn't open the door, she'd start walking away. And by this time, she was obese. And how she was so seriously obese, I don't know, because we had no food, but she was obese. And I remember one night that I waited by the door and she rattled the door. And as soon as she started to walk away, I pushed back the armoire and I looked. I creaked the door open and I looked down the hall, and she'd be screaming her head off and whacking herself in the head with a winter boot, and then go back in her room, slam the door. So this was a nightly thing that I can't even remember when it stopped. I think it only stopped when my mother actually tried to kill one of us, and then was taken away to an insane asylum in a straitjacket. That was the only time, but every night she repeatedly did this checking of my door to see if she could get in. And I waited for that every night. And
through many of the cases I've studied and even worked on, I've noticed a similar pattern of events where the individual begins experiencing paranormal activity, and typically it's paranormal activity that they alone experience. But that's on purpose. And then it progresses at various speeds, depending on the person, to the mind. All of these methods in which an entity, spirit, or whether or not you have multiple spirits or entities, haunt their target, whether it's more physical or outright paranormal activity or through their minds, this is what we call oppression. Basically, it is the haunting in of itself. Not all spirits or entities follow a particular order in their methods, but oftentimes their methods are based on their target's ability to be mentally strong and or aware of themselves versus outside forces, in addition to their fear. A person's personality, habits, mindset are analyzed. So if that person has a weak mindset, victim mentality, negative or manipulative mindsets that can be taken advantage of, they will absolutely be taken advantage of and used against them. Other examples of exploitable traits include, but of course are not limited to, codependency, addiction, dependency on others, egotistical or narcissistic behaviors, prone to anger, introverted, isolated, poor mental health, etc. So these types of people are prone to be targets. Nonetheless, once the entity progresses to the person's mind, that's where things can get extremely tricky, especially when thoughts and actions become manipulated. That's when the entity puts this person under influence. That is the influence stage. And this is where things become dangerous and enter dangerous territory. It's interesting listening to his account as he describes some of the self-harm behaviors his mother does to herself while under influence in possession. I think in the beginning where she begins whacking herself with the boot, I feel like at this point, like in the beginning when she starts doing that, she's under the influence stage and is cognizant enough to believe that what she is doing is helping her stop the entities temporarily from talking to her and maybe even stun them a little bit, but obviously that wasn't quite working. But as this goes on, it becomes less of influence and more of the possession side, especially when she starts doing her nightly checkup routine and moves to the more violent self-harm, where she begins whacking her leg with, I think he said, a log, but nonetheless whacking herself in the legs.
And my sister said that she was in the kitchen. My mother was in the kitchen. My sister was in the living room, and she heard my mother say, in a brash voice, "You're a witch. You're a witch." And my mother said that she needed to kill her because she was a witch. So she went chasing after her. And the only thing that saved my sister's life was when I left in the morning. It was a nice spring day. So there's a door, and then there's another door to the outside. And in that space is where you take off your boots. It's called a mud room. I had left that door open. I had left the exterior door open, and the swinging screen door was unlatched. So my sister was able to just grab the door and push her way through the two doors. And she said that's what saved her life, that I didn't close any of the doors, because my mother was right behind her, and she would have caught her if she had to take the time to open those doors.
You said that it got worse. In what way did it get worse?
Yes, it ramped up. By that time, now my sister had gone, and it was just me in the house, just me. And from the first day she came back, I remember seeing her walk through the house, and I took off. I wasn't, I was too distraught about the whole thing. But from the very next day, in the days following her return, she was now sitting in her chair, whacking herself with a piece of wood until she was all bloody every day from sunup till sundown. And she would sit there, hit herself in the chest with the log, and then drop dead her leg until it hit the ground. And it was this weird repeating thing while she was talking to herself. And talking in different voices and just going on and on and on and on. And it never stopped. It never stopped. Every day it was the same thing from sunup till sundown. And the weird thing is that soon as that sun started to go down, she would get up, retreat to her room, and then the banging would start. And I would start to hear banging. And we lived the house wasn't very big at all. From the living room, it would take me 6 or 7 or 8 steps, running quickly to go and open up her door. And I would hear this banging like people were wrestling. I mean, it sounded like when me and my friend would wrestle, in his house, and we had a subfloor, and, you hear the bang, like that. You hear it all around the house, And I was hearing all this banging and thudding that sounded like people rolling around on the floor, fighting for their lives. And I would run over to her room, open the door, and she'd be lying there in her bed with the covers pulled up over to her nose, and her eyes would be big like that. And then she would say, "Satan's jumping on my chest on the ceiling, from the ceiling." And I would be like, I didn't even know what, I hear all this banging going on, and she's in her bed. And like I said, she was obese at this time, so she doesn't move very fast. But every night, this circus of events happened during the daytime, whacking herself.
Okay, so I'm going to break this down a little bit more in depth here. So during the self-harm episodes, like I had stated earlier, she's doing the hitting with the boot and then whacking herself with the log in response to what this entity or entities are making her see and feel. So, through her perspective, she fully believes that the entity is inside of her, talking to her and trying to get her to do things through various types of illusions and hallucinations. Of course, from the perspective of an outsider like Michael, his sister and his father, it looks like a mentally ill person arguing with themselves and hurting themselves. But through the perspective of a psychic medium who is trained in this stuff, like I am, what is happening is the entity or entities involved have entered that person's auric field in addition to their energy systems within the body, such as like the chakra system, and has infiltrated it. In her case, they have entered through the roots and sacral chakras, which had been weakened from the grief associated with the loss of her father. The immense sadness created a crack or hole that allowed those entities or entity to enter her energetic fields. I'm seeing that these entities like to play on that specific trauma and tried to get her to relive those events, but with her other family members, such as her children and husband, the negative entity or entities, because a lot of times you don't just have one entity, especially when it's a higher ranking negative non-human entity. I don't want to throw out demon yet because I haven't fully looked into the case. Like, I haven't done a super deep dive. But when you have entities like that, a lot of times they work with others. So it's not that you're having one, you can have multiple involved. And so they're showing her some really traumatic stuff, some really gruesome stuff depicting her loved ones in horrific rated R manners and very like monstrous. So a great example, I had an astral attack where an entity was showing my husband, which at the time of the attack he was my boyfriend, and they made him look very zombie and demonic like, and it was really scary. And if you're somebody that's not familiar with the types of attacks associated with negative entities, it might just be very shocking and traumatic and just like you don't know what to do with yourself. But I'm very certain that they were showing her those types of hallucinations. I think the thing she was constantly being shown was never ending, along with the voices, which is why she opted to hitting herself. I think part of it was to stop herself from doing something horrible to some of her family members. As for the attempted murder of Michael's sister, the way I'm seeing it is very similar to the Arnie Johnson case, where the entity put him in a hallucination-like state where he thought he was being attacked and had to defend himself. But in this case, the entity was showing the mother that her daughter was an evil, grotesque witch that she had to stop in order to protect herself and other family members. This type of trick is one of the most common ways in which possession can manifest. So this is one. The other one is more like the Hollywood, eyes are black, and it's not even that person anymore, and it's the entity that has taken control of their body fully. So they can trick a person into doing things, or they can literally just take over their body. So in this moment, this situation, this was more of a tricking the person into believing a certain thing and to act on it. But later we will see that it then progresses to something even more severe. In the video, Michael talks about how the mother was taken to a psych ward but was cognizant enough to sign herself in and out after 3 months without doctors being able to diagnose her with anything, which is no surprise to me at all because these entities are masters of disguise and master manipulators. The whole point is to get people to believe that they don't exist, so they can continue to wreak havoc without any consequences. The longer they can go undetected, the longer that they can feed on that person like a parasite. And obviously, in this case, it succeeded. Unfortunately. But it did. Because people just thought she was cray-cray. And that's not entirely the truth here.
My whole entire childhood, she never talked to me. She never conversed with me because she was oppressed I was such a young age when she was oppressed and then became possessed that I never knew her. We never had conversations. There were 2 times where she actually spoke to me coherently and intelligently. And both times were when I was in the house and I was about to leave somewhere. And she said to me, she didn't try to get my attention, anything. She was like, ah, and, and singing and whistling. And then she said, it's like she broke out of it all. She stopped hitting herself. And she said to me, they're coming into me and running up the back of my spine. That's how they get into me. And then, and then here she goes again. 2 times she said that to me. The very exact same thing. She said that to me, like 30-second increments. And that's the only time I heard her actually speak to me in her normal voice. They're the only 2 times I can ever remember in my entire childhood.
Yeah, I mean, what she says makes absolute sense because think about it. If they're entering through the root chakra and they're going up the body, they're going up the spine, they're affecting the central nervous system, and that's why she's all like, woo. And they even state that in the video, like the interviewer, the guy that's talking to Michael, he even says, like, if anything were to try to possess or do anything like that, it makes sense that they would affect the central nervous system, which can cause people to just like, they can have tremors, they can just be very twitchy. And you know what? We do see this with another person. If you've ever watched, I believe we covered this on Lights at Midnight podcast. We'll put the video over here. But we cover one of Colin's videos, I believe, where he interviews Brooke. So if you don't know who Brooke is, I'll put her channel somewhere, but she's the one that works with a demon that I will not say the name of, just because of the attacks that I personally got. I don't want anyone else having to deal with that. But because that entity was all up in her auric field, it is now it's been an attachment for her. It's like she's got the twitchies. You can tell. And she's just like the best visual example of that. And so it makes a lot of sense too. Once we continue through Michael's story and what happens, but at this point, the entity is affecting all the chakras in her body because it's been an attachment for a long time. It's been years because the story covers many years. And so, yeah, I mean, it's not going to just affect one chakra. It's going to affect all of them because when one chakra is, I don't know, let's say overworking or blocked, well, depending on where it is, it's going to affect the other ones, especially when it's the lower. Because if you're not getting the proper energy flow through one of the bottom ones, it's going to affect the ones higher up. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I looked at my mother, you could see, wow, you got really nice eyes. And I saw nothing. All I saw was the glint of the reflection of light on her eyes. They were just black balls. And, I've read stuff that people have seen that kind of stuff, and it sounds so stupid and so cliche, but I don't know how else to explain it. There was no pupil, there was no iris, there was no white. It was all black. And at that moment, she had a handful of pennies she had in her hand, and she whipped the pennies at my face, and I turned around and I began running. She ran after me. I was just bolted. I went around the corner. I opened the door and I ran outside, and I ran out onto the street. Or between 5 feet and 5'2". She is very small, but obese. She jumps him, takes my dad, who's 5'8", and in the prime of his life back then, takes him to the ground, throws him to the ground, jumps on top of him and starts scratching his face and howling and gnarling like an animal. I'm like watching it like, oh, she's going to kill my dad. And my dad happens to get up, and then he runs outside, and I run out after him. And I'm standing in the driveway with my dad, who was just defeated horribly. She threw him down like he weighed nothing, and started scratching and clawing at his face. And my dad couldn't say anything. He was out there, like, wow, that's not my wife. That's not the woman I married. There's an actual process of them going in and taking control of the central nervous system. That's why people, they have weird movements and stuff. So this is what I believed about my mother. The longer it went on, the more demons that were allowed to take refuge in her, and the more voices I heard, the more different kind of voices, the more dialects I heard when she would be, sitting there talking all day, arguing, you know, with seemingly no one, and her voice is changing, you know, and and
Yeah.
and, and this is what they do. This is what they do.
All right, so at this point, the type of possession we have here is not the tricking her into believing and seeing things to get her to act a certain way. No, this is full on possession. Her consciousness has a back seat, which is why she's blacked out at the time of the attack on Michael and then the father, and she doesn't remember what happened. But, that is very masterful and purposeful in terms of how they do that, because it makes it seem very convenient to the people that were going through the attack. But then it's like when the police and other people come, the entity is making it like, oh, there's nothing wrong. And so it lets her come back forward to be like, I don't know what's going on, to make it look like there's nothing wrong. But in actuality, they're just hiding in that moment. But yeah, that's full on possession. Eyes are black. She's got some wicked strength, throwing down the father to the ground, and just shutting the door and having the windows go wah 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 wah. That's crazy. Like, you have to be shutting a door very hard to do that. I can't even do that in my house. Okay, so that is very telling. Also, at this point, she is then taken back to the psych ward, where she pretty much signs herself in again so she can sign herself out in 3 months. There's a pattern here. But I want to just point this out, because you're going to have some skeptics be like, oh, well, maybe it's just mental illness. So from covering those wild cases during Shocktoberfest, especially the ones that exhibited schizophrenia, I noticed a similarity between Michael's mother and the Roland Zinne case, especially since they both claimed their target were witches. So we're jumping back to the first attack where the mother tries to unalive the sister, and she claims that the sister is a witch that needs to be stopped. But with the Roland Zinne case and Michael's mother, they both claim that there's a witch that they have to unalive. And oftentimes in schizophrenia, the brain hyperfixates and dramatizes strong belief systems, such as religious or cultural ones, and leads them through this delusion that the person involved needs to be stopped or unalived. The reason I'm mentioning this is because while this case looks very similar, like the mother could have schizophrenia, I don't feel like that's the case. Before the 1960s, women were oftentimes diagnosed with schizophrenia for not performing their duties or being troubled, for pretty much anything that wasn't liked. In the 1970s, however, schizophrenia started gaining more serious criteria for diagnoses, especially in the United States, and the fact that Michael's mother was able to sign herself in and out, like, cognizantly, and pretty much go undetected as having some issue. I mean, she was there how many months? Because she was put there, got out, and put back. And I don't know how many rounds she did, but I know at least 2 rounds, so a total of 6 months. And at that point, she did not have a medical diagnosis, which I found strange because in that time, they liked to diagnose schizophrenia. But if she wasn't diagnosed with schizophrenia, something be off, right? So if you add her being able to switch in and out of episodes for convenient periods and not remembering anything, her eyes turning black, and unusual strength, to me, that only validates the possession narrative, plus the paranormal activity that wasn't just experienced by her, but then Michael and the sister as well. So it wasn't just now the mother experiencing some weird things. The children were experiencing some things. The daughter had a padlock on the inside of her bedroom door. Hello? I mean, could one chalk it up to having adrenaline spikes during episodes? Maybe. But not being diagnosed and being able to snap in and out conveniently to evade suspicion of any paranormal stuff or mental health stuff. I mean, when somebody has mental health issues, a lot of the times they can't just stop when they want to. It's kind of through the criteria in which one gets diagnosed. You have to fall through different things. You can't just be like, oh, that person is seeing things, boom, schizophrenia. No, there's other criteria that you have to follow in order to be diagnosed with certain illnesses, and she did not fit them. So, and like I said, this story, this account of Michael's mother, this happened in the 1970s. And so, I mean, you would think that she would have been diagnosed if there was something going on, and even later in the video, at some points, he talks about trying to get some of the documents from her stays at the psych wards and them having to keep them off the premises because usually that's protocol when something weird happens. Because back then they kind of burned the records if they weren't really needed. But they only would keep them if something really weird would happen. And they kept them off the premises of the location. So yeah, and then they mysteriously lose them when they find out he's writing a book. Yeah, okay. So there was some funky stuff going on. But yeah, this is a perfect example of possession. Now, I did some channeling, and I will relay what I got with that because I wanted to know. I was like, is this demonic? Is this thought form? Is this non-human? Something we don't know? Is this malevolent earthy? What's going on? So I do have some pictures, and I will share those. But, so, as you guys know, when I do channel, I use my blindfold. It just helps me get into what I need to do and focus. But the second I put my blindfold on, I watched this smallish but elongated figure with two horns on its head shapeshift and grow into something very large. The body was more elongated like a snake with a head with two horns, and as it shapeshifted, the head kind of stayed relatively the same shape but grew in size. And the body turned more monster-like and grew arms and legs with sharp claws. It looked a lot like the demon card in my Oracle deck, which I'll put here for funsies, I guess. And so it's definitely non-human. And it can shapeshift. And I was seeing this image of almost like a doll or a cutout of a person laying in a circle. I don't think that they dug up the grandfather or Michael's mother's father and did a ritual. I don't think they did anything like that. But we know she did a ritual, and I'm seeing this dark, shadowy energy coming out of the body of whatever vessel they're using. It could just be a doll, whatever. But I'm seeing this dark, shadowy energy coming out of that body, and that's kind of my validation of where or the origin of the problem is from. And so here's my little picture. Alright. I also kept hearing the word legion over and over again. So that has to do with an entity that has worked with others. Typically, demonic entities work with legions. And so that's kind of I'm gonna lean in and say demon-like or demonic-like. But I would probably say in this case, I know the word demon is overused a lot, but I feel like in this case, I would say it's leaning definitely in that direction. I was also seeing thought form type energies. And so I kept seeing these faces morph, and they would just constantly morph and shapeshift. One could argue, well, what if it's the original entity just shapeshifting and stuff? Yeah, but like one of my symbols for thought forms is a certain like looking entity, and like the way in which the face changes. And that's kind of what I was seeing here. So ignore my crappy drawing here at the bottom. But you see here, it's like it would go from this to this to this, and it would just like, I don't know, it's like this constantly flowing shape-shifty situation. And so I do feel like thought form energies were involved to a degree, but I feel like it was more associated with the negative energy output caused from the grief from the mother losing her father, and then the trauma that Michael was experiencing in the father and the sister. And so I feel like some of that was going on, but that's not saying that they're the main issue. No. It's caused as a result of the main stuff that's going on. If that makes sense. I did see a vision of like this interdimensional portal thing, which is this triangle thing with the circles around it. To me, that's how I see interdimensional portals, because the portal can go through different realms and dimensions. And so the main entity that's attached to the mother is definitely interdimensional, and it can make portals in the space. So I would say in this case, yeah, what they experienced was very severe, and I don't think it is a result of Michael's trauma showcasing itself as possession. I think, no, this is possession that caused trauma in Michael and the other sibling and the father. So yeah, this case is freaky deaky. My heart goes out to him, because I can't even imagine living with a parent like this, someone that's supposed to take care of their child or children, who's supposed to love them and nurture them, and he didn't get any of that. And he lived his life growing up in fear, constant fear of whether or not, that night or that day was going to be his last day, because he didn't know what his mother was going to do. She already attempted murdering or unaliving his sister, and then eventually jumped to him. And yeah, that's scary AF, and I feel horrible for him. And I feel like that experience, because it's happening over several years. It's his entire childhood and part of his adulthood. So that's leaving behind a lot of trauma, a lot of scars that he has to heal from, and is causing negative issues within him. I mean, watch the video to its entirety, because I'm not covering the negative effects that it had on Michael throughout the rest of his life. That's a whole nother topic in video. But yeah, I hope he's able to heal from this and is able to lead a happy and healthy life. But yeah, guys, I'm gonna end this here. Let me know down below what you think of this video. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Don't forget to share. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you all soon. Peace out.
Deep within the silent dark, I found a flame.